everyone, Rachel Chaco here from the Tech and Learning team. Thank you for attending today's Tech and Learning Future Proofing Your District Plan Conference. A special thank you to our sponsors, CatchOn, ClassCraft, FileWave, Global Teletherapy, Grade Camp, and Stanford programs. And a thank you to all of our association partners. Today's virtual conference is focused on taking the lessons learned from current remote learning programs to create long-term plans that support effective teaching and learning, both online and in person. I want to remind everyone to log into the Conference Hub using the link sent to you in your confirmation email. Once you are logged in, you can visit a sponsor booth to learn more about their offerings and book a meeting or live chat with them. You can see your personalized agenda. You may network with over 1,000 of today's attendees via the registrant directory and chat features. You may also access all of the conference resources in the download section and win prizes. Through the Conference Hub, you will find several buttons to enter yourself into our passport to prizes. Please visit all pages using the navigation bar at the top of the page. Every time you find a button and fill in the form, you will earn one entry into the raffle. All entries are eligible for a series of prize drawings, and it's only one prize per participant. You can enter once for every button you find. We will announce winners via email at the end of the conference. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions for the presenters during the webinar, please submit them through the Zoom chat and question and answer feature. Please know that we capture all questions and our presenters are happy to answer them as time permits. Today's slides and additional resource materials are available and may be accessed within the Downloads tab of the Conference Hub. We encourage you to download any resources or links that you may find useful. Be sure to use the conference hashtag #TLTechLive in your social posts. Please join me in thanking our terrific speakers who have kindly agreed to spend some time with all of us today. I also want to thank each and every one of you for joining us and for spending this time together. So now please join me in welcoming our presenter, Frances Gipson.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you here today. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen here for you. And hope that all of you are having a wonderful start to your conference day. And as you come to this space today, some connections. Who am I as a learner and a leader, and why is this an important topic today? So first and foremost, I think of myself as a champion for what I call Team Kid. What do I mean by that? I mean, you put students at the center and then you backwards plan for what our students need. That's why I joined the field of education, because I really want to make a difference in the lives of our students, their learners, their leaders, and the community that supports them. My experience have a broad range from the classroom to the boardroom. I've had an opportunity to be a teacher across all grade levels, including multi-age classrooms. Had an opportunity at UCLA Center X to lead one of what I think is the premier coaching programs, to really think about how we work with our subject matter experts and support leaders in the field and our classroom teachers. I had an opportunity to lead instruction in 122 schools on the east side of Los Angeles and also serve as their superintendent. I've engaged in what I say is the hardest job I will ever love, which is being a turnaround school principal, and the important lessons learned from both my students and my community and the voice of my teachers. In my current capacity, I've decided that it's really important to help the next generation of leaders lead, and most importantly, lead with love-soaked leadership. So how do we move forward in a way where not only research and practice come together, but also thinking about how we take that same data and what's the story around it. Some might talk about the quantitative and the qualitative if we were to get into the research talk for a moment, as we think about that PhD landscape. But I want to get really practical. What's the data in your system? How do you tell the story around it? And what do you really even have access to? So as we think about this environment, this topic became incredibly important. There's an image there that talks about COVID-19 pandemic, and then we went into crisis. And many of us still feel like we're in that space where it's emergency pedagogy for all. And we're trying to figure out who has connection, who doesn't have connection. How do we have relationships with folks? How are we going to decide on grading, attendance, you name it? And then there's this part of us in this now and future orientation is also thinking about what does it mean to re-enter? How do we move from remote to restart, let alone recovery? And so as we think about that, many of you are in different places depending on where you are in the country. And so I'd like to think about this session as a curated set of provocations and resources to help support you in that. And then that last circle there is also, it's a challenge for me. So it says new normal. So let's talk about what's normal for just a moment. And I'm going to encourage you to use your Q&A box and your chat box, as Rachel said. And some of my colleagues in the equity community are asking the same question. What is normal? And was normal what we want as we think about this new normal? So normal for many, in the words of Linda Darling Hammond, was deeply erratic and unequal in delivery. Now, some places were doing a phenomenal job. They were really closing gaps around big issues of equity and really becoming mirrors and models of what we could do as a nation as we meet the needs of all of our students. But we need to think about this, think about it deeply, and seize the moment to deliver for our students. Seize the moment to deliver for our students. And so some of you might have attended my prior session or the session coming up around thinking about this context of modern learning systems. What does it mean moving forward? So some of the words we've been using are remote and distant and online that might feel a little cold to somebody. So how do we make that warm, relational, connected storytelling environment different? How do we make it different? How do we say that this is our new way of thinking about modern learning? And so as we unpack this, some folks think about, well, we need a toolbox for this, and we need resources around this. And so I'm going to share some of those resources. And as I share, I want you to think about a couple things when we think about a toolbox. A lot of times we have a toolbox that's filled with lots of resources. And you go to that toolbox and you know how to selectively pull things out. And then there's kind of like, I think about, you know, growing up and seeing the garages with that big red tool chest with all of these parts and resources that I would look at and think, I'll never know how to use all of that. Those are those intervening resources that we need to know we can go to. But most likely districts are going to have a toolbox. And what I would actually advocate for as we move forward together and we think about the bandwidth that we have for a lot of our learning in this space is think about like a tool belt. What can you quickly and nimbly use? What is resourceful for you in that moment? And do you know how to differentiate quickly? And then know when to go to the toolbox, and if needed, go to the tool chest, knowing that they're all available to you. So I hope that makes sense as we think about this conversation that we're going to have today. So I'm giving you one provocation. Is normal really normal? And do we want to use the language of the new normal? And then another provocation, we'll have a series of 3, is to think about this quote from John King, our former US Secretary of Education and the President and CEO of EdTrust. He says this: there is a danger to this sequential model, but there is also a danger to behaving as though those gaps that students have don't matter, and that you can't get them to succeed with grade level work without ever addressing these gaps. And so there's a balance that is needed. So as we listen and learn together today, what does this provocation mean for you? Does it mean that we redesign to where we're doing some work around thinking about what's happening in Cleveland around mastery learning? Is there ways of thinking about competency in different ways? For example, if we think about the Khan Academy and how they've really said, this is what competency means, and then we're going to backwards plan from that so that the topics and strategies are addressed. Does it mean that districts and states, like we've seen in the advocacy from Linda Darling Hammond, curate high quality curriculum based on things that we've done and know works, and then put our energy on the relationship building and those intervening supports that we might need as we think about the capacity for our current system? Another provocation coming out recently with Forbes magazine, saying that online teaching will no longer be an option. So we know that this looks different in lots of different environments. It has to do with connectivity, whether students have a device, where are they using that device? And I'd like to just capture for you a moment the concept of learning settings. what do we know about the settings in which students are learning? So the overgeneralized sense of the brick and mortar of the schoolhouse, there might be a mourning about that. There's a loss, but for others, it's an opportunity. So as you move forward, thinking about where do we build capacity, how might we find the balance, and also the advocacy points that we need as we move out of this emergency into this restart, and really thinking about what the modern learning systems might look like for your district and your schoolhouse and perhaps your classroom. So as we think about these provocations, we're also going to put a link in the box for you around some storytelling. And I'm going to engage in a read aloud. Why not? Everybody's telling stories online right now. And so we'll be the next to capture that. And so as we think about some of the storytelling, some questions to kind of noodle with, as my great colleague would say, how do we respond, create, and inspire in the face of these provocations? How do you do this? I want you, as you think about this, to think about, like, what does your heart tell you? When you think about social emotional learning practices, when I really am still, I think about Maya Angelou and how she says, life whispers. When you listen to that whisper, what does it tell you? What does your mind tell you? What does the research tell you? What does the data tell you? How are you mining that? And what type of data informs these responses? Where do you gather that data from? You see, a good researcher will always start with the research problem and then try to figure out what's the data that's going to inform me around that. Or you might have what's called grounded theory. I'm going to immerse myself in this and see what patterns emerge. So really think about what are the data points that are going to help you with this. And then what kind of data do you need to be an equity champion? What kind of data do you need to be an equity champion? I think this is so important because when we talk about equity, there's many variables and there's a lot of texture that we need about that. From the relationship that we know, also to, what do we see with attendance patterns? What do we see around connectivity? What do we see about how students are engaged in different types of tiered supports? What kind of data do you need around the student, around the schoolhouse, and also in the community as you think about community of schools types of practices? So let's engage in a little bit of a read aloud. So in January 22nd of this year, a colleague sent this to me. Why data storytellers will define the next decade of data. And I was really intrigued by this, and I printed it out and just kept a copy by my desk and kept thinking about this and thinking about this. And in this environment, I think about what Brent Dykes shared. How do you tell your story? How do you tell your story on Zoom? How do you tell your story to the community? And I don't know about you, but a lot of us have probably been watching a lot of news right now, whether it's at the federal level, the state level, your city level, your county level, trying to understand, like, what's the story that we're telling? What are the data points, the modeling that we're looking at? And so as we think about this storytelling, Brent Davis also wrote a book around this called Effective Storytelling and How to Drive Change with Data, Narrative, and Visuals. He starts really taking us into the place with this work and in his book around data becoming more democratized. Well, if data is more democratized, who has access to it in your system? You see, one of the things I found is a lot of times we have these like great dashboards, but does the teacher have it? The teacher's making so much sense in their classroom. Does the community have it? So what are the ways that we could make these things available and simultaneously build the data literacy around it and our own skills as leaders and nurturers and teachers around the storytelling that goes with it, that texture that gets added to it? So we want to make sure that we're building those capacities. We want to get curious about this work. So one of the things is we're starting to see more and more automated dashboards, and maybe in your system you don't have those. But what are the things that you're asking about? And how are you matching with the resources in terms of the data warehouses that might be out there? And might there be new questions that you're going to have to ask and seek more data around? So think about those as we think about some of the curated resources that we'll be sharing today. Once this is done, it's easier to communicate to the field, right? It's a way to share our values, and we can help visualize these insights in a more structured way, and most importantly, in a narrative way. You see, the data feels cold, it feels very technical. So how do you take this adaptive mindset and this storytelling leadership opportunity to bring all of this together? So let's think about some strategies around this, so that's not just facts and figures that influence the decisions, but it's really the understanding of the relationship and the human creativity, the empathy, and the understanding in the ways that can easily be replicated in a technology environment. So what's the story of your system? If I'm the reporter that comes to you right now, how would you communicate what's happening for you in your classroom, in your district, in your learning community? What are the insights that you're seeing, and how do you know that those are the insights? If you've got a lot of data, how are you giving voice to your data? And to think about how each data point, you can almost think of it as a character in a story, the protagonist with its own story. So as you think about these tales, there's also a neuroscience background to it and a way that we can engage in it. So facts and figures go to the brain, right? And the brain a lot of times forgets, but the stories go straight to the heart. They make us feel, and the heart remembers. So as I think about this, I think about what are those stories that I tell as a principal. And a lot of my colleagues, as I mentioned earlier, always say, I'm on Team Kid. And they're like, what does that mean? And what I found is when I said I was on Team Kid, it was a collection of stories, things that changed who I was as a leader, but really also told the data about our system and the ways that we needed to be actionable around equity, and also being advocates in our system. So I think one day about the relationships, my second year as a principal, and I had a young man who I would call him Mr. President, because he just had this really assertive handshake and would look me in the eyes every morning. He was like, good morning, Dr. Gipson. And of course, I stood at the gate every day and would always greet all of our students with all the energy and love, because I was so joyful to see them. I really was inspired by them each and every day. And every day when I wake up, I always say, thank you for the opportunity to serve. So Mr. President, he had this nickname. He comes up to me at lunchtime and he says, you know, Dr. G, I need to talk to you. I need to file a complaint. I said, oh, really? So what is this complaint about? He said, I can't get a chocolate chip cookie today. I said, okay. And I listened to him and I said, well, why is that? And he goes, you raised the prices and you didn't tell us in the student store. And I said, you know what? You're right. I didn't know about that. So let's go get some information about it. And of course we dug through that a little bit, but I said, and I looked at him, I go, but more importantly, you're upset because you really wanted the cookie day. So let me make it right with you. So I told the youngsters, I said, you know what? Tell you what, on Friday, I'm going to bring cookies. Of course, they were healthy cookies. And I'm going to make this right with you. I'm going to make amends, and we're going to make sure that everybody's clear about things. So then I remembered a youngster who said to me, you know, your office is the perfect place to have lunch together. You're actually really interesting, Dr. G. You know, principals have a lot of character and insights as well. So I was walking across the garden and I saw one of these young men who had been part of this group. And it unfortunately was a group that didn't always make the best choices, let's just say. And the tardy bell had rung and the youngster was walking towards class. And I came up to him and I said, hey, you're almost to class. Let me walk you in. And I said, you know, I've been thinking about these cookies. And he said, me too. And I said, well, why don't we have, I don't know, I've got 8 chairs in my office. Why don't we have a cookie club? He kind of looks me in the eye like, is this lady for real? And he said, yeah, miss, that's actually a great idea. A cookie club. I like it. I said, well, tell me who should be on the list and I'll invite them all for cookies on Friday. So I thought this was a simple notion. Of course, we unpacked lots of data and reasoning around this, but the young men showed up. They started building relationships. We started going online and looking at colleges together over time. We started looking at their data to where they could tell their story of what they needed. And what we found over time is that the students didn't know all these data points. So it brought me to this place of how do we help students also understand what this means for them. Over time, this group became more and more diverse. It also became a place of connectivity and relationship, and it became known as the Cookie Club over time. But it was really about a story of listening to students, helping them understand where they are, where they want to go, helping them both dream and do together. But I guarantee if I had given those students a printout of their dashboard and not built relationships and helped them connect and create this Cookie Club narrative, it would have felt very different. So I give that to you as an example of the warmth that data can also bring. And also it helped us tell a story of a different way of building relationships at our school. So as we think about this data storytelling, it's simply not just about the data. You see, if folks had looked at this young group of men, they would have told you a very deficit story. But these young men became my leaders. They became my responsible risk takers. They also became the folks who helped us think about integrating our school community in different ways. Data storytelling is about the blending of the two worlds, the hard data and the human communication, and about having a narrative that's anchored with compelling data. So as we think about what we want to do moving forward with data, and we think about equity, what's the story in your district? So maybe add to the chat box, what's an equity story that we need to address either in our schools or community or in as a nation together? Thinking differently about that new normal or those provocations that we started off with. And if you were to tell a story of equity, it might be as simple as this story of the young people and getting the right resources and helping them understand where they were in their college access and their pathway and ways to manifest dreaming and doing for them. What's the data that you have that would actually help you with that? What do you got? What we're finding is a lot of folks may have data that they can't access, or they can't access it in a meaningful way. And if you're going to access it in a meaningful way, then what's the way that you can tell your story around it? How can you persuade others, in the words of Robert Garmston, prolific author of cognitive coaching and adaptive schools work, to help people understand these pivotal moments? And my hunch is that there's a huge equity story that's going to come out of this environment. A way that you want to compel folks to take action on behalf of youth. To compel students to take action on behalf of youth. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a neuroscience behind this. So the science of this well-constructed story actually creates oxytocin in the brain. A great colleague at Claremont Graduate University, Paul Zak, and I encourage you to look at his TED Talks. They're really incredibly powerful and motivating. He looks at this issue of trust and storytelling and why our brain craves this development of tension and the ability to sustain this story. He gives lots of examples of these well-constructed stories across multiple domains, from business to boardrooms to classrooms to community. And what happens in the brain when the oxytocin levels increase. In fact, the US Department of Defense has actually supported these studies because there's so much we're learning about this brain and the ways in which we connect with one another around our storytelling. So as you think about this neuroscience and this equity, what questions are you asking? What's your story? And I invite you to think about this storytelling around perhaps even these three themes as you start. A lot of folks need more connectivity. What is your data saying? Where do you get that data? What are you telling about a story of a student who's sitting in a parking lot at a fast food place getting connectivity? Or the family that has multiple users at one time? What's the community advocacy you need? Another one might be around relationships, that social emotional connection with students. Again, thinking about how we help folks have more bandwidth on the energy around the relationships to get that right intervention. And then another really powerful connection to exploring your story is this sense of agency. How are teachers and students engaged in this? In other words, like, how are they making things really meaningful and relevant for themselves right now? Are the lessons and the ways that they're learning outside of the bricks and mortar creating these interest-based mindsets for them, where they're exploring in ways that they've never explored before? And how are we encouraging that voice and choice in those spaces? So these might be 3 places for you to start with your equity story and your narrative in your organization. If we were all sitting together, we'd be having a powerful dialogue about this and exploring, like, well, how do you get your data? Where do you get information around that? So I encourage you to add to the chat box, what are some ways that you're exploring these in your district? And think of yourselves also as a network right now around resources that you want to continue sharing and exploring with one another. So through this experience and through my roles as a superintendent, as chief academic officer, I also had an opportunity to work with some innovators in this space and really think about enterprise reporting. How do we get into the hands of the teachers, hands of our students, and also make sure that we build the strong data literacy around that? And so in this remote environment where the learning setting has changed, how do we know what we know about these inequities and the ways that we might think about eradicating them and knowing where to put a narrative, where to put our resources? And so I'd like to invite a great colleague, Marites Plunars, with NI K-12 360 to share some free resources that are available to districts. And they've really done this because they know that this is so needed right now, and to explore some ways that they can personalize and support you with that. So Marites, help us figure out some ways that we can tell our district story. So Marites, I think it's time for you to tell the district story. You might be on mute. So as we think about some of these resources here until we get that connection back, I'll share with you that Marites and her colleagues have been working with lots of different districts across the country, and big districts, small districts, ways to think about how to connect them with different types of resources. And so some of the things they've developed are remote dashboards that can help us think about where are the people and devices in the system? Where can you find your student information system, your asset management system, resources from students and parents all across your system in a way that you can quickly and nimbly see these resources. They've also created different ways to look at staff and student logins and your network traffic logs. And what you might find is that your district actually has a lot more resources than you know about. And so they can work with you to help pull these into one enterprise system where you can nimbly look at your data. Depending on how your system is set up and perhaps your learning management system and the resources that you've curated in your own particular district, they're able to look at network traffic logins and be able to provide you some reports about that so that you can start building some of your data literacy and thinking about where are you with student learning and in progress. And of course, these are different data points that you want to add more texture around to help support you in thinking about where you want to think about mastery and grading, attendance, engagement. There's lots of different ways that they can also help support you with tracking at a glance. And these, again, can be moved around with different types of orientations, from executive dashboards to ways that you can just click on each one of these and go a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. So they can help you have insights between the people and the devices. Where are students using devices? Are they logging in on a phone, on a computer, on a district device? and what's the application usage around those efforts. Additionally, you can also engage in some different heat maps so that you can see what are the patterns of connectivity. You can view the status of the device and the hotspots and the different deployments. You can drill down and filter by student groups and the subgroups within that, by classrooms. You can use the maps to see where there is low internet availability in the community. And you can also use it to monitor things like teacher professional development. You're able to track activity by day and for your students for things like your ed tech training, your learning management system, different types of collaboration tools from the G Suite to Zoom. And you can see that all of these tools and resources are incredibly interactive, and it will help add to that texture of that story that you're telling. Here's an example of how you can see the different applications. Of course, we know this gives you insight into what's being used, not necessarily how they're using it. That's the type of information that would come from the dialogue with classroom teachers and students. But it can also give you insight into what students are connecting to and what resources are being used most widely in your system, and thinking about where you want to make your supports available and your investments available. There's different ways that you can look at your student learning and progress to track assignments and coursework. You can analyze your formative assessments. And again, these are all efforts that are personalized based on what's happening in your district, because you know that one size does not fit all. And if you'd like to learn more about these resources, I know Marites will be available to you to provide information, and there's a great little video. And again, they're making all of these resources free at this time to help you think about how you could tell your story, what questions you still need to know, and what are some ways that you need data available and at your fingertips to help tell the story of your district. So I hope that this has provided you some great curated resources, and I'd like to take an opportunity to look at the chat with you and see what questions you might have. So I'm seeing a lot of connections across districts and sharing some of the different resources, both in your local community and in your larger community. An appreciation for the resources that are being shared. And again, this PowerPoint is available to everybody. I definitely want to thank our colleagues at INIVE, because again, it's challenging to bring all of this together. And I think a lot of folks are saying, you know, we know students are not connected. And in fact, a recent report said as of March, 2/3 of students in high poverty communities were not finding access points. And that could be even with a device, they weren't able to connect to the internet. So this is really helping people think about where districts can be strategic. You've seen things like folks putting buses in different communities, or working closely with their public libraries so that they can create some study hubs, or big partners coming together. Some of our lots of different sponsorship opportunities to get MyFIs and so forth to students as well. Lots of folks appreciating the opportunity for teachers to have this at their fingertips as well. So again, folks asking, where do you find this? You can go straight to the INIVE website, go ahead and sign up, and they will connect with you and think about some great ways to share these resources in your district. And so with that, I'd like to share with you a note of appreciation. We know that this is a very challenging time for so many and in so many ways. And if this data is a way to help you put a little bit more at your fingertips, and also give you some insight around what's the story that you'd like to tell moving forward, we thank you for connecting during this time and space together. And most importantly, I want to say thank you for being on Team Kid. Being an educator is the hardest job we'll ever love, and it's great to lead with that love-soaked leadership. I encourage you to reach out. I'm always available to you as a resource if you'd like to learn more about some of the things that we've shared today, and wish you a great conference session. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
All right, thank you so much for that. I just want to say thank you on behalf of the entire team. Thank you for attending today's Tech and Learning Conference. A special thank you to our sponsors, CatchOn, ClassCraft, FileWave, Global Teletherapy, GradeCam, and Stanford programs. And of course, thank you to all of our association partners. Please join me in thanking our terrific speakers today. And I also want to thank each and every one of you for joining us and spending this time together. Don't forget to join us again. We have more sessions running all day until 6 p.m. Eastern. So pop into any session. We have some great speakers today. Also, don't forget to register for next week's Tech and Learning Roundtable webinar on Wednesday, June 3rd. Join Dr. Keisha Ray as she speaks with district leaders about how security issues relate to online learning as schools plan for next year. We'll be covering topics such as keeping data private, cybersecurity concerns, and monitoring online activity to make sure students are safe and content is appropriate. You can register at www.techlearning.com/events. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hopefully being able to get together with everyone in person very soon. Until then, stay safe and healthy.